Tribalism is a useful framework for thinking about how we can have a collective cultural consciousness without it necessarily being the low resolution racial consciousness of the National Socialists in the 1930s, or the kind of critical consciousness that's been raised in resentful revolutionaries by intersectionals, Marxists, or liberal accelerationists. And I understand that last one will provoke an antibody reaction from the types that throw around the word woke right, especially at those like me who suggest tribalism is a necessity, or to have an identity within the battlefield of identity politics is a useful tool to push back on the intersectional attacks against straight, white, Christian males as the avatars of the Western hegemony. I'll be going through that and why that's bogus, don't worry. But let's kick this discussion off with some comments from my friend and colleague, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Now, Ayaan is a very thoughtful woman, an excellent essayist, a compelling speaker on issues like immigration and Islam. She recently addressed the New Culture Forum's annual Smith Lecture. Hello to all of those that were there and greeted me and gave thanks for all the work that the New Culture Forum, my other side gig alongside lotuseaters.com, is doing. And I also spoke with Ayaan before her Oakshots lecture and contributed to some of the framing of that, and she delivered a fantastic 40-minute address to the people of Oxford. And I recommend you go and watch that. That's right there in the sidebar. But I disagree with Ayaan in her framing of this lecture, and so I'm going to play a clip so that we can rebut, with friendly critiques, the paradigm that a lot of anti-woke liberals are taking when addressing woke identity politics.
The key problem, in my view, is that despite all good intentions of past scholars and policymakers, diversity or multiculturalism or identity politics is morphing into full-blown tribalism. Please ask me why I am not worried about nationalism. I'm told, look at the extreme right-wing movements in Europe and their popularity. They point to the re-election of Donald Trump. And in these developments, some very prominent commentators see a rebirth of the conditions that led to the rise of Hitler in World War II. I disagree with them. I'm not denying that there are pockets of blood and soil extremist nationalists in Europe and other pockets inspired by white supremacy ideology in America. But these extremists are marginal, they are few, and with zero political, social, or cultural clout in the 21st century. The threats I see to Britain and the rest of Western civilization are the re-tribalization of society through this pursuit of diversity. Identity groups that have no national loyalty to the country they call home, the evaporation of a shared set of values, and the fragmentation of identity, the ethnicization and racialization of all political issues, from the economy to immigration to climate and even foreign policy, as you saw in the aftermath of October 7, 2023.
Now, I think it's important that she ends in that clip on October 7th, because the model of Israel is actually something we're going to be revisiting, because before I get totally ahead of myself, I think the model of national tribalism is a useful way of thinking about it, because this is what the Israelis practice, and even though I'm apathetic about Israel because I've never been, Zionism for the English is an attractive prospect. Zionism for the Hungarians, Zionism for the Japanese, dare we even say Zionism for the Germans, where they have a conviction in themselves to defend themselves against existential threats, and they're unapologetic about remaining a host majority with their own particular national culture, the defense of their geography, a thriving religious and civic culture, high GDP per capita, and strong birth rates. Those are all things that I wish for every friendly country, and that's what Israel has, and Israel does that because they don't practice grey goo multicultural liberalism. No, they're very tribal, not just in being the tribe of Israel, but also very particular around the kinds of people that they are and the kinds of people that their leaders owe their loyalty to. Anyway, point being, I disagree with Ian in that tribalism itself is the problem. I think the problem of woke intersectional identity politics is the anti-white racism, is the pathologizing of the child as either a lifestyle accessory to self-actualizing autonomous liberal parents, or as a dependent care obligation that should be eradicated because it inconveniences you through abortion right up until the moment of birth, or even after birth, with the Democrat senators voting against the Born Alive Survivors Protection Act. I think the problems of woke intersectional identity politics is that it targets straight white Christian men as ambassadors of an oppressive cis-heteronormative patriarchal hegemony. All of these bogus buzzwords that are actually just window dressing for ethnic resentment. I think that's the problem, rather than the tribalism, which is, I think, the natural human state. And I think you have to recognize that natural human state in order to conduct politics. And the reason we didn't have tribalism isn't because of woke identity politics. It's not because of this ideology that's been injected into societies. It's because of the a priori diversity facilitated by mass immigration that has been imported into societies. So if you import tribal politics from around the world because they're homogenous ethnic groups, and you bring them into contact with outsider homogenous ethnic groups, you create tribal politics. That's man's natural state. You didn't need woke identity politics to make the people of Somalia, where Ian's from and speaks as an authority on, tribal when brought into England, because they're already tribal against their African neighbours, and now they're extra tribal against ethnic and religious and racial, even in their eyes, outsiders. So Ian finishes her entire lecture with, we must opt for the nation over the tribe. And the reason I disagree with her is because I think they're synonymous when they're at their best. So let's look at a microcosm of this liberal, constitutional, all identity, including national identity, is a self-associative set of values, a propositional nation view, versus the more post-liberal or even pre-liberal in their thinking, tribal view. And I think this is well elucidated by the entire discourse around the woke right. So I want to kick off here with Joel Berry, who is the managing editor of the Babylon Bee, and well done to the Bee for essentially inspiring Elon Musk to buy X. That's going to go down in the history books as an excellent thing. I think I might disagree with Joel on matters of politics and theology, but I commend him for having inspired that choice. Joel and Auron clearly don't get on, because there is a clip here linked in this tweet where Auron says that Joel Berry is a rabid ethno-nationalist, but not for America, for Israel instead. And Joel responds to this, and he and Auron get into a bit of a spat, and I'm not interested in litigating the spat between the two, but what Joel says here, I think, is accurately representative of the kinds of views that Ian was putting forth. That MAGA republicanism, and the best kind of right-wing, is creedal, constitutional, self-associative, fundamentally liberal, and it doesn't think that there are any bearings on your identity other than what you choose, because we're all born free and equal. And those have a lot of liberal assumptions baked into them that I don't think are quite correct, especially when you're dealing with outsiders to the liberal tradition, because, and this is part of my conclusion, the liberal tradition is a tribal tradition. It's very particular to the Anglo-Saxon sphere. The English and their exporting of the English way of life into constitutions that arose in the likes of America. But anyway, Joel says, when Auron calls him a rabid ethno-nationalist for Israel, that Auron says, I am an ethno-nationalist for Israel, but not for anyone else. Auron is either a bad faith snake, knowing Auron, that's not the case, or he isn't as smart as I thought he was. I don't think the pejorative is necessary, but I understand where they disagree. For the sake of brotherly kindness, I'll assume the latter. I'm not against a certain kind of nationalism that takes culture, beliefs, and character into account. America should be for Americans, and we should start defining exactly what that means, because right now things are a mess. What I'm against is white nationalism. I think skin colour is a stupid thing to base ethnos on. And because I believe skin colour is irrelevant, Auron will strawman me and say that I believe that America is just an economic zone, or tax farm, or slander me as a multiculturalist. Now, I don't think Auron believes that culture and ethnicity is purely a product of skin colour, because white is an American anachronism. This is, I don't wish to be condescending as a European and an Englishman here, but for those who think about it on the European continent, to say that you're a white nationalist in England would be ridiculous, because you'd say, I don't want to be colonized by the French or the Germans or, God forbid, the Spanish and the Greeks, if they even fit the description of white. Sorry, Stelios, love you. Anyway, point being, I don't think our role even abides by the anachronism capital W white in white nationalism. So I think that's incorrect, first of all. But when you say America should be for Americans, the question that's brought up here, which Joel needs to define, is who are Americans? Is one an American because they hold an American passport? Is one an American by dint of birth under the 14th Amendment, which was only meant to apply to black slaves, but has now become birthright citizenship for the children of illegal immigrants, which the term anchor babies comes to represent, no matter how inflammatory it is. Point being, who qualifies as an American? Is it just someone who looks at the flag, recites the Constitution off the top of their head, but arrived here yesterday? Or, in fact, is the whole world just Americans in waiting if they idolize America but just have not set foot on the soil yet? Is someone an American if they hold the passport but are waging an ideological revolution against the country? Or is someone more American than a recent immigrant even if they love the country, if their ancestors can be traced back to the Mayflower? These are all complex questions. And there's also the other question, which is that is someone more likely to buy into a certain and given worldview, a culture, and culture is just a story that a people tell themselves about themselves in a place over time, is someone more likely to buy into a culture, which is Joel's version of propositional nationalism and national identity, is someone more likely to buy into a culture if they feel it's their culture, as in their people's culture, as in the culture perpetuated and built by their ancestors? This is why a lot of second, third, fourth generation immigrants who have never set foot in their home nation, particularly in the Middle East, North and Sub-Saharan Africa, who live in Europe, but identify more with the most doctrinal, devout interpretations of Islam, and also with their national identity that has been inherited from their parents. Simple story. I went to school in Southeast London with a lot of black kids. Most of them individually really nice. I remember getting on with a guy I saw recently, just ran into him in a restaurant, who was an aspiring UFC fighter. He used to live in Thamesmead, Nigerian chap, but Nigerian. Not British, even though he was born here, Nigerian. And even though he had taken on an English name, he would still assert his Nigerian bona fides over other Nigerians and also other Africans. He used to have a rivalry with one of the Ghanaian kids in the class. It was a friendly rivalry, but it still shows that the children of immigrants often think of themselves as being from their parents' homeland rather than the land that they're born into and is their adopted identity because their parents have taken on British citizenship. So what I'm saying is this all applies to the old world context, and so it does apply to the new world context with the propositional nation of America too, because just because you've tried to set up a propositional nation doesn't mean that the old world mentality of my ethnicity, my heritage, even my race when I come into contact with other races, even though I don't like that term, determines my likelihood of buying into a culture. That rests like a dead hand on people who come from old world countries when they come into a new world country, and even the children of old world immigrants who learn about their parents' homeland and start to romanticize it and identify with it. These value propositions of propositional versus old world ethnic-based nation clash. And this is what's being got out here. And I know I'm spending a lot of time on this, but I think that's a solid outline of the debate. Thank you for watching that clip from Tomlinson Talks. If you liked that and you would like to see more, you can get the full 90-minute show every week on a Wednesday afternoon, live from 3 p.m, only on lotuseaters.com, and all of the other content that my colleagues produce behind the paywall for as little as £5 a month. Thank you very much for supporting us, and I hope to see you there. Until next time, goodbye.